Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to this ICAS webinar. My name is Joanne Miller, and I have the pleasure of being your webinar host today. The event today will last 1 hour and will cover information on how to start a career in accountancy, business, or finance. Now, before we begin, just a few housekeeping matters for everyone, please. As we go through the presentation, please feel free to submit any questions into the Q&A box. These will be anonymous and we will collate these and then we will read them at the end of the webinar, and myself and the panel will answer those questions. You can also join in the chat and the chat box at the top of your screen, which will allow you to comment or discuss any of the topics with fellow attendees as we go through the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and then we will share the recording afterwards for everyone to view and refer back to. And when we share the recording, we will also share the slides for everyone to be able to access. Everyone, as they join, will automatically be muted, so please don't worry about any background noise wherever you happen to be joining this call from. We look forward to receiving all your questions this afternoon, and we will try and get through as many of them as we can at the end of the webinar. We will also be asking you some questions as we go through, so we will share a few polls with you. So please look out for those and please do engage and respond just to let us understand a little bit more about you and your backgrounds as we go through. Okay, so to start with, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Joanne Miller and I am the chair of today's webinar, and I will be joined by a number of panel members. Amy MacDonald, who is the audit manager from Audit Scotland, Sneha Shah, who's an associate in EY, and Brian Thompson, who is an audit director at Concilium. Just to give you a little bit of information about my own background, first of all, I am a CA. I trained in a small firm back in 2000, having completed a BA accountancy at Glasgow Caledonian University. So I probably followed what we call the sort of old-fashioned traditional route into accountancy, and that I did do an accounting degree first of all. But as we're going to find out today, that is not the only route into accountancy, and indeed it's not the most common route either. I completed my training with a small firm in Glasgow, taking slightly longer than the traditional 3 years, as I had a maternity leave break in the middle of my training contract. Not something I would necessarily recommend studying while very pregnant, but you know, challenges and overcoming them is something that you learned as a CA. After qualifying, I moved into a mid-tier firm to work in audit, and worked as an audit manager for 4 years on a range of clients across a number of different industries, learning about bakeries, learning about manufacturing clients, learning about a whole range of different industries. I then did move from practice into industry and got some experience, you know, being audited rather than being the auditor. So I had a spell in local government, working in the finance department with Glasgow City Council, and I also worked at one of the large concert venues in Glasgow in their finance team. So quite a mix of training and experience. While I had been working in audit, I had also been very involved in the internal training within my firm and running a lot of training for our CA students. And that's really where my interest in sort of furthering my career in the education side came in. So I had the opportunity to move and join ICAS in 2009, and I've been here ever since. I started in the audit space because that was my technical background. So I came in as a tutor in the audit space and also worked on updating materials on the audit side of things, and I then expanded into the other subjects in the course, and I'm now the programme lead for our TPE, which is the case study, the final exam in our qualification. So overseeing the course, the content, the delivery, assessments, everything to do with the final level of our qualification. So working at ICAS then, let me just give you a little bit more information about ICAS themselves. So a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard of ICAS, you know, the acronym, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. But just because Scotland is in our name, it doesn't mean that we're only an institute for Scottish Chartered Accountants. We are a global community of accountants. We were the first professional body of chartered accountants in the world, but we now do have over 3,700 students registered with us, and we have over 23,000 members who are spread all across the globe, working in a range of practice, industry and other business areas. As an institute, we have a range of different responsibilities. We are responsible for education, so we set our syllabus and we launch our education material. We also examine, so we set our exams. We're a regulator for all the firms in our industry, and we're also a thought leader, and we have involvement in many different government discussions, decisions, and political decisions that are made. So CAs really are very influential across a whole range of industries and backgrounds. Along with the technical content, ICAS is very strong on their ethical leadership, and that is something that goes hand in hand with both our education and the practice for all our members, the ability to make ethical decisions and do the right thing. And that is something that as students you will hear throughout all of your learning and your training. And it's also something that our firms often hear about in the training and the webinars that we run. We are the only institute in the UK whose members are able to use the CA designation after their name. So that's something else that you can look forward to if you choose to qualify with ICAS. So if you do find an interest and you'd like to become a CA, then what do you need to do? So the first thing that you need to do is that you need to enter into a training contract with an ICAS authorised employer. So you'll often see that abbreviated to the initials ATO, which just stands for Authorised Training Office. So this is where you start to work in a particular organisation, but you will also have a contract with ICAS where you can start your training and you can sit your professional exams to become a chartered accountant. And you will do that training alongside working full time. So it's something that very early on in your career, you will learn that ability to balance the working and the studying that go hand in hand together. While you're working, it's a requirement that in order to become a CA, you must have a minimum of 450 days technical work experience, and that's throughout your training contract. So that is usually a 3-year period. Again, that can vary depending on your employer and the type of contract you're starting. So the expectation is that throughout your contract, you will have 450 days of technical work experience. So when you take away weekends and holidays, etc., how many days you have spent actually on the job learning and gaining experience. And as well as the work experience, there are the exams that you would need to sit and pass. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 stages of exams, which I'll explain a little bit more about. And as I said, my responsibility now at ICAS is in that final 3rd year of the qualification and the assessments. So let me just tell you a little bit more about our qualification overall. So this diagram here shows you our brand new qualification, and it's very exciting times for ICAS. We just on Friday of last week launched our brand new syllabus, and this is the first stage of that just going into practice now. So there are 3 levels in the CA qualification. You can see we have knowledge, we have skills, and we have integration. This syllabus is written and updated regularly by experts and subject matter experts, both within ICAS and external. We regularly consult with external experts and employers to make sure our qualification is current, it's fit for purpose, and it's relevant to the needs of today's business. This new delivery model that we have launched brings in an element of structured flexibility, whereby students can choose when and how they study. And there's a combination of online learning, face-to-face workshops, digital assets, a whole range of material available to students to work through. So if you have friends or colleagues who perhaps studied in the past and they have memories of piles and piles of folders and a lot of paper, then you'll be pleased to know that we've very much moved away from that, and we have a digital first approach to our educational content now, and everything that you need to look at and study from lives on our online learning platform Advantage, where you're able to access all of your materials and everything else that you need in order to help you study and work through the qualification. Now, it is a master's level qualification, So by the end of it, you will have a qualification which is an equivalent level to a master's qualification. So working through the qualification, you will start at the knowledge level in year 1. Those of you who are studying a relevant accounting degree may get exemptions from some or all of the subjects at knowledge, and that would be looked at on an individual basis when you go to apply for your contract. We would be able to advise you on which exemptions you are entitled to and which subjects you would have to enrol in and sit the course and the assessment for. So stage 1 really is that foundation, the knowledge that you need in order to progress through. We then move on to stage 2, which is the skills level of our qualification. And again, those of you who have friends or colleagues already going through the qualification, this used to be referred to as the TPS level of the qualification. So we have brought in for the first time at ICAS electives to our skills level. So you can see on the diagram there that the darker coloured subjects are the core subjects that everybody will study. So everyone will study reporting and performance, which looks at financial statements and accounting. They will look at advanced reporting and performance, advanced assurance and auditing, corporate finance and modelling, and data risk and technology. So everybody will study those subjects. And then there will be a choice, and this is normally a choice that's made both by yourself and your employer as to which of our electives is best suited to the role that you currently have, the areas that you're interested in, etc. And those electives cover areas such as advanced tax, data analytics, innovation for growth and sustainability. So a whole range of new subjects coming in to the CA qualification. So as I said at the beginning, it is really exciting. It's all very new and you would be coming in right at the start of all of this. Once you complete the skills level, you would move on to the final stage of your qualification. And this is really about bringing together all the knowledge you have and all the skills that you've developed and really integrating, bringing all of that together where you're in a position to sit the case study assessment, which you need to start to think about giving advice in real life scenarios. How would you give advice to a client? How would you make recommendations? We bring in all the technical knowledge that you have, the skills you have, and also we start asking you about things like professional judgment and ethical decision making so that you are in the position to be able to give real life advice to real life clients as a qualified chartered accountant. As I said, those of you who graduate with an accounting degree are likely to have exemptions from some or all of the knowledge days, but this is something that can be looked at with your employer and when you start to make your application into ICAS. So thinking about training as a CA then, you can train as an ICAS CA across the UK. We have training venues and we have employers throughout the United Kingdom. So when you start to look for opportunities, you can apply to those areas either where you're currently based or where you think you might like to work from in future. So you can have a look at the vacancies, either directly with particular firms if there are organisations you're interested in working with. You can also have a look at the vacancies on the ICAS website where we list authorised training offices and current vacancies. And the classes and the exams are delivered at a number of venues all across the UK. So there will be a local venue to you where you can attend your classes alongside working. As I mentioned earlier on, when you join ICAS and when you start your training contract, you enter into this contract where there is yourself, there is your employer, and there is ICAS. And together we talk about this tripartite agreement where all three of you together have this contract to get you through your working life, your studying and your exams in order to get you as a qualified chartered accountant. So your employer undertakes to provide you with relevant practical work experience, and ICAS will then take you through the learning journey and the assessments in order to allow you to qualify as a chartered accountant. Okay, so let me now come on and introduce the panel. Hopefully from what I've said already, you'll have started to realise that there are so many different routes into becoming a CA. And today on our panel, We have members who have taken a number of different routes and have a number of different career areas where they have come from, and they will share that with you today. So as I go to introduce them, what I would also ask you to do is just to complete the poll that is or will pop up on the screen for you, just to let us understand, are you currently studying for an accounting degree or a degree that includes accounting in it? Now, please don't worry, the polls are anonymous. If you could just reply to that. As I mentioned, the panel today, I am delighted to welcome along Amy MacDonald, Chartered Accountant, who's an audit manager with Audit Scotland, Sneha Shah, who is currently completing her CA training and is an audit associate with EY, and Brian Thompson, CA, who's an audit director with Concilium Chartered Accountants. Okay, it looks like Amy's having some technical issues just now, so let's just get started with our first questions, and then hopefully Amy can join us and we can continue with her. So first of all, can I just ask each of you to just introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information on your background? So could I perhaps start with Sneha, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sneha and I studied accounting and finance at the University of Warwick. So during my time at the university, I decided to undertake a placement year between my second and my third year to understand more about my degree. Therefore, I started working in audit at EY in London. So during that time, I specifically specialized in auditing the insurance industry. And this is also the time where I started my ICAS journey and completed 2 exams, which actually helped me set foot into the whole auditing world. I really enjoyed my placement year and therefore managed to secure a graduate role. So for now, I've come back as second year associate. Been 6 months already, and I'm back with the same team that I had in my placement year, which made it easier for me to transition back to work. And I'm happy to say that I've completed 6 exams with ICAS so far.
Great, thanks, Sneha. And Brian, if you could introduce yourself as well and just give us a little bit of your background, please.
Yeah, thanks, John. My name's Brian. I'm an audit director with a firm called Concilium Accountants based in Glasgow. I qualified with ICAS in 2011, I hate to admit, so quite a while ago now, having done an accountancy degree with Strathclyde. Since then, I've worked, I qualified with the Big Four and I've worked with a couple of independent firms in Glasgow before ending up at Concilium, sort of running the day-to-day their audit department. Mostly based out of Glasgow, West Central Scotland. The firm's now grown to about 55 staff as well. So, yeah.
That's great, thank you. So I think both of you have mentioned a little bit about, studying accounting and finance, but why did you decide that the CA route was the route for you? What was it that made you want to train to become a CA? Let's start with Brian this time.
For me, it was kind of a logical step. I hate to say I'm kind of 3rd generation CA in the family. My grandpa was one, my mum was one, so it kind of made a logical step after doing an accountancy degree at uni. It seemed that the next logical thing to do was to go on and get a CA traineeship. It was obviously pushed quite hard at university at the time over maybe some of the other qualifications just because we're based in Scotland and there was good links with the uni. But I think it was kind of viewed as something that would open doors to things further down the line. The audit qualification and the audit experience gave a really, really good background to learning about different businesses, different industries, even the difference between, say, businesses in Glasgow and Edinburgh. There's a fundamental difference in how these businesses interact with people, what's important to them. So getting that exposure and that experience at a young age was the key driver for it for me.
Thanks, Brian. And Sneha?
Completely agree with what Brian said. So when I was young, I used to go to my father's workplace actually, and he'd give me drafts of his business financial reports, and he'd asked me to fill out some of these financial statements, which actually really fascinated me with the mechanisms of how a business actually works and all the different types of costs and revenues that go into like a business. So because of that, I was really intrigued and I wanted to further pursue accounting and finance to university. And once I graduated, I also thought it was logical to complete a CA qualification. So I managed to start that in my placement year. And yeah, I think that's how, yeah.
Thank you. That's really interesting that you both had the sort of family link, because I'm the complete opposite. I didn't know anyone who was an accountant. No one in my family is or was an accountant. And I actually wanted to be a teacher. That was always my thing at high school. I knew lots of people who were teachers. But I think when I went to my careers meeting and they looked at my exam results, they said, you've done quite well. Oh, you got an A for accounting and you're higher. Why don't you go to university and study accounting? So I did. And then, as Brian said, a lot of the accounting degrees in Glasgow, they had very strong links with the Institute. People would come and give presentations, and most people in the class were applying for CA training. So I just kind of did the same and applied. Probably didn't do what you said, Sneh, about doing the research a little bit in advance. Looked at the vacancies, applied for the ones that were left because I think I was a little bit late. And yeah, just sort of by accident fell into being an accountant without really knowing what an accountant was. But yes, it's a great way to learn so much, as Brian said, about different businesses. Going into audit helps you understand that as well. So there are so many different routes, and I think that's what we want our panel to, our attendees to take away today, that there's so many different ways into the profession, and that there's no one right direction or journey to take. So talking about starting off with your employer, Sneh, I know you're still in your traineeship. What was it that made you choose the employer that you're with just now, EY?
So when I was looking at my current employer, I was looking at growth opportunities. I was also looking at the culture of the firm to see whether it aligns with mine, flexibility such as hybrid working, which is very important for me. I was also looking at diversity with the teams and within the company itself, and also the leadership and any opportunities for me to have any leadership opportunities within the firm. So yeah, that's exactly what I looked at when I was kind of looking at applying at EY.
That's great, thank you. And I suppose looking at the recruitment process from the other side, Brian, could you maybe give us a little bit of understanding of the recruitment process, from the employer's perspective, when you're looking at bringing in accounting trainees?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, from talking to people in ICAS and stuff like that, when I qualified, there was what was known as the milk round, and that was when all the opportunities came out. It tended to be August to sort of October at the moment, at sort of time when all of the opportunities came out. However, that's changed in the last few years, so it's quite common for employers such as ourselves to be out in the market at the moment, for example, looking for a CA trainee. So there's always opportunities there. I think it's maybe a wee bit different from what you alluded to earlier, Joanne, of the last opportunities that are left. I think it's more of an annual opportunity for these things. In terms of our approach to it, we use the Become a CA website, which I think most of the independent firms do to advertise their traineeships. There's the virtual careers fair that ICAS do as well, where a lot of places will go along and advertise opportunities. The interview process itself, we have we do a two-stage interview after the application, primarily because it gives students the opportunity, or potential students, the opportunity to go away, have a think, and come back with different questions. Because I certainly remember from mine, there's things you probably wish you did ask, and it gives you the opportunity to ask these questions as well. We focus very much on students' values. The best one in the world, an accountancy student coming out of university, a lot of them have very similar degrees, a lot of them have quite similar backgrounds, so it's understanding the values, what they're looking for, what's now alluded to, what they're wanting, what their values and fit are going to be for the culture, because it's certainly an important thing to make sure that fits right. We do a two-stage interview. We have quite a simple competency-based set of questions in the background to it, but nothing too strict, and it's definitely something that we would encourage people to view as a two-way process, and encourage students to ask questions and things like that. In terms of what we would be looking for from a student, If you come to an interview, you obviously want to have researched the firm, the degree, the qualification, but it's also just actually focusing on showing what's different about you, what you can bring, what you want out of it, and making sure you can actually really demonstrate what makes you a wee bit different to everybody else.
That's great. Thanks, Brian. Okay, I think we're going to ask you another wee question just now. We've got a poll which is about to come up, just to find out, for those of you that have joined the webinar today, just what stage you're at in your sort of decision-making process, in terms of recruitment, in terms of applications, etc. So again, I think there's 3 questions on the poll this time. If I could ask you just to respond to that just now, and then we'll move on. Thanks. Okay, so while everybody's doing that, let's move on and just start to think about the training and studying and into the CA qualification. And obviously we're giving you all a lot of information just now, so please remember that we will come round to any questions at the end. So as we're speaking and as the panel members are giving you some advice, if you do think of any questions, please just pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll come round to those at the end and try and answer as many of them as we can. Okay, so let's think again, just, let's talk about what it's like, training to become a CA. I mentioned at the beginning that you have to be able to sort of juggle that working and studying together. So could I maybe ask you both how you found your training, or how you're finding it? Sneha, let's start with you since you're in it right now. What's it like, studying and working at the same time? How's that working for you?
Yeah, to answer your first question of how it's been, it starts with a very comprehensive module before you start your practical experience. Well, that's how I did it through my employer. And then you get involved in like the actual real work, hence you're putting what you learned in practice, which is really fascinating. And then because of this, you're continuously developing professionally, gaining tons of knowledge about the industry, auditing, and even the real life practicality of how accounting works. And because you're studying and working professionally at the same time, you're kind of developing. In terms of how I balance my study and working professionally, from personal experience, to balance study and work professionally, you must have great time management and also have like a set schedule which should be followed very diligently, which really helped me to complete my study goals. Also, I usually set goals at the end of every week to kind of track my progress, because it can be kind of difficult and daunting sometimes to balance work and study. But it's also very important that we take some time out for myself. So I used to go on like walks or go for swimming. It helps you feel refreshed and productive. So yeah, it's good to balance your work, your life, and your studies at the same time.
I think that's all great advice. Thanks, Nia. Brian, do you have anything that you want to add to that about balancing the whole working and studying, or maybe perhaps from the employer perspective, how do you see your students managing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of a very, very similar stuff. So we bring our students in probably a few weeks before their training contract starts, so they get essentially 3 or 4 weeks of induction in the office, and then they're out to pretty much straight out to ICAS at that point. We've obviously got much smaller intakes than the Big Four in terms of student, although it was our largest intake ever last year. But it is a difficult balancing act, and I think from our perspective, the thing we do is we make sure we have regular catch-ups with the team throughout it. The advantages of having a slightly smaller intake is that we can have check in with our students on a weekly basis when they're out at classes. We speak to them on every 2 or 3 days, just in general, how they're getting on. Formally sit down with them if there's issues, and just more formal catch-ups to make sure they're studying. Most of our students will do, as Snea suggested, a study plan. They then share it with us. They give us updates on the progress, all of that sort of side of it. So it's really just about the supporting and the communication side of it is really sort of the key thing. And I think the big thing that students should be looking for to make sure they're understanding what that support's going to look like from an employer's perspective. It is a lot of work, but it's worthwhile to get the students through the exams, because everyone wants them to get through as quickly as they can.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, and I think that's completely right. You know, you're talking about from the employer's point of view, you want to give that support and make sure they get through first time. And I think definitely from an ICAS perspective, you know, we're the same. We want to make sure that students have got the help and the support they need. Yes, they're working full time, but at the same time, we want to make sure that they've got that time set aside. And as Sneha said, the importance really of good time management, you know, and it's something that if students don't start off on that foot, they very soon learn, you know, when things go wrong in the first set of classes or exams, just how important it is to be organised, to know what classes you have, what exams you've got, what your deadlines are for submitting coursework, etc. You know, and put all of that into some kind of a plan to make sure that you do get through everything that you need to get through on time. A question actually popped up in the chat that I thought would be quite useful to address just now, and Brian, I think I might put you on the spot here if that's all right. Somebody's asked if we can just give a little bit of a description as to what do we mean by being a chartered accountant? What is it to be a chartered accountant? What do you do? What does it involve?
It changes every day. So if there's an audit director, the large part of my role is signing off audit reports. But within that, we've got a team that works all the way from a first year trainee all the way through to that audit report ultimately getting signed off. So our trainees get exposure to a wide range of industries, the same that will be in most firms, and they're actually out on site working with the finance team, that sort of stuff, going through some of the audit testing, that sort of stuff. We've got supervisors and managers within the team as well, who have the majority of which have been promoted internally, and they are the ones out responsible for coaching, managing, and sort of making sure the work's done to the right stage, the right quality. What we also do is we progress our team quite early on as well. So as soon as somebody's hit second year and the new first years come in, the theory is they should be able to coach them in the year what they've done before, so they get that sort of advice, leadership responsibilities, all of that sort of thing. The more senior you get, you generally become that point of contact for the business owner, the finance director, with everything from I want to buy a business through to I want to buy a property, the bank's pulling my funding, all of those sorts of questions. You really just become that sort of go-to person for them. This week alone, as an example, we've signed off 2 audits. We're working our way through a group audit that's got subsidiaries in Malaysia, Singapore, Dubai, trying to sell a business at the same time, and sort of generally just getting coaching and feedback to a number of people as well. So it really is a very, very varied role, and everything you do is built up to, similar to the ICAS qualification, that you build up that knowledge, you build up this how to apply it and skill set, and then learn how to properly give advice to clients.
Thanks, Brian. That's really good, and I think that's interesting. So that's very much the sort of practice, what we call chartered accountants working in practice. A lot of chartered accountants will work in audit, but we do also see students and chartered accountants in a whole other range of roles within practice. So things like tax advisory, corporate finance, restructuring, accounts preparation. So there's a whole range of roles within practice, but we also have chartered accountants that train and work in industry, so actually in companies and businesses. So working in the finance team, you know, you could be working in the finance team at a manufacturing client. You know, before I started at university, I had a summer job at a car showroom, and I worked in the finance team, and we did the month-end accounts, and we pulled together depreciation. I learned very quickly that rust is not a colour. I got told off when I did a stock count, and I counted cars that were a sort of strange orange colour, and I wrote rust, and the manager got very upset because putting rust beside a brand new car was apparently not a good thing for the value of that car. So I learned about valuations things early on. So I think it's very important. You know, we talk about the ICAS qualification being your CA passport into so many roles within practice or industry, and you know, in so many locations around the world. And it really is. We talk about it being a business qualification and allowing you to go and gain that experience that allows you to go into, you know, many roles. So I'm hoping that's helped with that question. As I say, we've got some other questions coming in that we'll answer at the end, but I just thought it was maybe worth picking that one up just now to help understand the rest of the session. Let's move on and talk. I mentioned a little bit about exemptions already. So those that are studying an accounting qualification could qualify for exemptions from some ICAS subjects and exams. Some employers actually still do prefer their students to attend those classes and sit those exams. Brian, does your firm have a policy on exemptions? How does it work from your organisation?
So we tend to not take any of the exemptions that are available to students. Quite a lot of the students are probably taken a wee bit aback by that when you talk through that, but we would let them know at the end part of the interview process. The reason we don't is we've actually got a former ICAS lecturer as our senior corporate tax manager. And I think I know you were talking about the large folders of ring binders and stuff like that. The first year exams were about that much. It's the second year with that, assuming you knew all of the first year information. So you don't know all of that stuff coming out of university, and it's also a slightly softer landing into the ICAS training program. So they're out together for quite a bit of time at the start, together as a cohort. It gets them back into the way of studying. It gets them away into a different way of studying, because it is very, very different from university, and it makes sure that they're getting into the volume of information and things like that as well. All of our students do subsequently agree it was the right thing to do once they get through it and things like that as well. So, and it's a big investment from the firm as well. So we lose them for best part of 10 weeks before Christmas. Obviously there's the financial cost, but it's certainly a worthwhile investment, and make sure they're as best prepared as possible for getting through the skills level. Can't say TPS anymore, but the skills level exams.
Thanks, Brian. You can still say TPS this year, because TPS doesn't officially end until December.
That's fine. We've still got 2 doing it, so yeah, we'll say that.
That's fine. Thank you for that, and I think that's really interesting. And students will see the benefits of both. Some students feel that they've already studied that content, and it might feel frustrating that their employer's asking them to cover it again. But as you say, if they're working through it with other students in their year group, it allows them to start to build those networks and understand the ICAS way of learning and applying, because they might have that knowledge in a different format. It might be from a few years ago at university, and it just gets them to bring that to the forefront again and update it. Not all employers will insist on students working through a course that they have an exemption for. Again, it's very much on an individual employer basis, and it's something that can be discussed. That's something to maybe ask about at an interview stage to an employer as to what their preferred option is, and some employers might give you a choice in that one. Delighted to welcome Amy, that she's managed to get in. Sorry, there was some technical issues I think at the end, so you're here now, so that's important. Do you want to maybe come in on that discussion just around the trainee side of things? And I know that you're at Audit Scotland, so would you maybe just give us a wee bit of information about the students and how they balance their work and studying within your organisation, just to see if there's anything slightly different from what Brian or Sneha had shared already?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, technology is great when it works, but unfortunately had a few hiccups there. So similar to Brian, we don't offer exemptions either. So as a student who'd done accountancy with finance at university, I was not particularly happy when I first found that out. But actually very quickly into going through the course, and definitely in hindsight was one of the biggest advantages really for me, because university and ICAS learning can be so different, and you can be a long time since you've done a lot of the practical elements of it. So I found it really, really helpful and supported me through that qualification. For our students, when we send them off for study to ICAS, we very much like to have that protected time and not bother students when they're out with work-related issues as much as we can. So it's about making sure that they also take ownership of their own study. We support them as much as we can through the avenues that we have, but they have to go through the qualifications and set those exams themselves. So it's about making sure that they keep up to date with what they need to know, that we are there to support them, and that they can basically just plan and organise themselves around that.
Thanks, Amy. That's great. And I think just on that, when you talk about supporting the students, I think it's really important to emphasise that, as part of this sort of 3-way contract with the employer and ICAS, we both want to support the students throughout their studies. Yes, we know it's quite challenging. It's really important to manage your time well, but there's a whole range of support available both within the employers and from ICAS. So obviously from our side, we give students access to tutors that they meet for each different subject that they'd be going through. There are subject managers who are sort of technical experts in each of those areas, who you have access to contact and speak to. We also have what we call programme leads. So we have 3 of us. So I, as I said, look after the case study, the final level of our qualification, the integration stage. We have colleagues who look after the knowledge level and the skills level. So again, we sort of oversee all the different subjects that fit into those levels. So students have the opportunity to come and speak to a whole range of individuals. And they also have the sort of online discussion boards where they can post questions, comments. They can actually engage with each other, as well as posting questions for ICAS tutors. And sometimes what we find is a student will post a question and other students will actually answer that before we've got to it, because they've maybe already studied that module, they've already struggled with that question. And it's a great way to sort of build that network, and also the reassurance that you're not the only person who's finding something a little bit challenging, and you know, it's okay to ask. There's no such thing as a silly question. You know, if it's something you don't know, then we'd much prefer you ask at that stage than get all the way to the exam and still be confused about something. So you know, that support is there all the way through from the ICAS side. And also from the employers. So I don't know, maybe Sneha, could you give some examples of any support you've had already as you've gone through your training and your exams that you've sat to date?
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely back what Joanne is saying, because the learning experience with ICAS is fantastic, and I can vouch for that from personal experience. I think from personal experience that the learning is quite linked to practical experience. So if you're putting this theory in practice, it's very intriguing. And then we also get a lot of in-person support from tutors and one-on-one sessions if needed, especially prior to exams, as what Joanne said. And then I love the way ICAS content is. So we're required to complete interactive workshop exercises and interactive learning prior to class, which actually helps us understand what is being taught in class quite smoothly. So we also get hybrid learning, and some days are in person, some are interactive online, some are just learning online, and it helps with productivity and just a different change in scene. So I think supports quite well from ICAS side. From employer side, you have counsellors. For my firm, you have counsellors. So they support your progress. They support if you need anything, if you need any professional advice. And there is quite a support for the CA qualification.
Sneha, and then maybe Amy, could I come to you just to give from the employer side what support you have in place for your students that are going through the qualification?
Sorry, was that to me? I just cut off there a little bit, but I think was that question to me? Perfect. So yeah, so we have quite a lot of that we've tried to put in place. So we have something that we call the Professional Trainee Steering Group, and that's essentially a number of individuals within the organisation who oversee the overall training scheme and the day-to-day running of that scheme in support of the trainees. And one of the groups that we have that feeds into that is what we call the trainee feedback group. So it's a group of trainees that set their own agenda, have their own discussions. It's an avenue for them to talk about the trainee scheme, talk about ICAS, any issues that they might be having, that they can then feed back to us to support them through that scheme, to support them through ICAS. We obviously have the training principals, which is myself and another colleague that is there, on a day-to-day basis to help those students as well. And they're all allocated a mentor. So that will be a trainee who's gone through ICAS a couple of years ahead, who can give that one-to-one support on anything that they might need additional help with, as well as a buddy who's there on a day-to-day basis within their actual team to help them with the work and getting that relevant practical experience for the law book. So yeah, we do try to put quite a bit in place to support the trainees through it, because we recognise that it's a difficult qualification, so you need all the support you can get.
Thanks, Amy. That's great. And hopefully this is all really reassuring to those of you that are considering this as a career option, that, lots of people said it's challenging, but there's support all the way through, because everybody's, got a vested interest. We all want you to do well, whether it be ICAS, your employer, everybody wants to make sure you get through and get that qualification. And getting that qualification does open, as we kind of touched on earlier, so many doors for you. So I think I'll maybe ask Brian and then Amy if they could just give me a little bit of their perspective on the advantages of the CA qualification and what that's given you in terms of opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, the CA qualifications opened a lot of doors in terms of getting to know a lot of businesses, work with a lot of businesses, and give advice to a lot of businesses. But I think beyond that as well, looking at the people I went, like even just the people I went to university with, you've now got one that's very quite working as a CFO at a tour company. You've now got one that's working in a bank, now that's working in statistical analysis within an insurance company, and they all qualified through various different pathways within ICAS. So it really does open up doors to get into a large variety of businesses, a large variety of roles, routes, all of that sort of stuff. So I think it's that the best thing is really to see it as a pathway to open doors for you. Certainly from my perspective, you wouldn't be able to sign off audits without it, which has given me the career and the stresses that come with that as you go. But at the same time, there's people now, I know people at university are now lecturers at universities, people who are working at ICAS, people still working at the Big Four, people working as in independent businesses and working at various levels in industry and things like that as well. So it definitely opens up a lot of doors from that side of things.
Thanks, Brian. Amy, is there anything you'd like to add to that, or any other thoughts you've got on just the opportunities of having the CA qualification?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Brian. I think it does open doors, but I think not only just to other careers or other aspects of what you're aligned with, but you know, internally, if you really like where you're working, that qualification will help you progress within your organisation. But if you think that you want to try something different, you know, maybe you're an audit, maybe you think you want to do tax or accounts or whatever, you have that ability to go and get that learning and that experience. And as we've already said, it's an internationally recognised qualification, so it really does create a lot of opportunities for you.
Thanks, Amy. That's great, and Brian. And I think, yeah, I would just echo what both of you have said. You know, it really is that sort of passport really to go and do so many careers. And there are so many organisations who will see the sort of designation chartered accountant and they want to employ chartered accountants. You know, if you look at a lot of the large organisations that all the listed organisations, if you look at their finance team, you know, they're nearly all made up of qualified chartered accountants from ICAS or one of the other accountancy bodies, and it really does give that opportunity to move into, you know, you don't need to stay in accountancy practice, you can move into industry, you can move into the third sector, you can go abroad. You know, I know people who have gone to Australia, who have gone to United States, that have gone sort of all over the world to work because that qualification is recognised, and there is that ability. And I think there's been a question on this we might get to at the end, that sort of reciprocity of, you know, if you go to work in another country, they will recognise that your qualification is at a particular level, and you know, you will get sort of reciprocal membership of the equivalent sort of ICAS body in that country, and vice versa. You know, ICAS has a programme in place to recognise people who move here who have, you know, an accounting qualification, and we look at sort of how they're mapped and what the sort of equivalent qualification is. And sometimes if our qualification is ever so slightly different, someone would need to sit one or two parts of our qualification in order to get reciprocal membership, and vice versa. If you were to move abroad to look at one of those organisations, there would be a similar process in place. But it really does give you that opportunity, you know, to be mobile and take your career, you know, to a number of different places. Talking about employers and different workplaces, let's just get a little bit of background on the different environments that we've worked in and what the workplace is really like. Sneha, do you want to maybe start in terms of your current role, in terms of the work environment? You know, is it all very work focused? Do you have the opportunity to socialise with colleagues, etc.? You know, what's it like working in sort of a Big Four organisation, which is where you are just now?
Yeah, so for EY, we have a hybrid working system where some days are in the office and some are at home, which provides for flexibility. The sizes of the team are usually around 10 to 20 people, depending on the client. But because the teams can be quite big, it helps with networking, it helps with growth and connecting with different kinds of people from a very diverse background. As a Big Four, we also tend to spend a very considerable time in audit from planning stages of the audit to the end of it, so around 1 year. Hence, you get a very focused experience if you work for a Big Four. But to help diversify your experience in the firm, they usually help you allocate. So they usually allocate you to different clients for different periods of time so that you can diversify your experience and your learning. And then outside of work, we have a lot of networking events, a lot of networking opportunities. So you're not only speaking to your peers, you're speaking to partners, assistant managers, seniors. So it's a great social environment, great networking opportunity, great way to get advice, for your career after EY or, just within EY if you choose to stay after qualifying.
Thanks, Sneha. So can I maybe ask, you've obviously given us this sort of insight into a large firm. Brian, you mentioned that you had sort of trained Big Four and then moved. Could you maybe just give us a wee bit of a comparison on your experiences of working in a large and then a smaller firm?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Big Four atmosphere is what Sneha said. It's you're working in big teams, you're working with big businesses, you're working probably on businesses for longer periods of time. Whereas if you compare that to sort of an independent firm like we are now, probably the volume of what you do goes up. You're working across probably 20 to 30 different clients over the course of the year, but you're working on them for slightly smaller length of time because the businesses themselves are smaller in nature. What you do get though is a lot, from my experience, is a lot more detail into those clients. We deal with clients, we'll deal with the director's personal tax returns, we do the corporation tax, our corporate finance team will do with fundraising, grant funding, disposals, all of that. So we really get to know our clients. And you are at the end of the day, you are the person that the owner's phone, the finance director's phone, that sort of stuff. And I think that that's the thing I've enjoyed about it more. You get that opportunity to really get to know the owners, what it is that's important to them, because ultimately these businesses are what's putting food on their table, and that's really what I enjoy, being able to help them with that. I think the atmosphere side of it as well is very similar. That although it's a smaller team, it's a very social office. We've got a hybrid policy as well, completely open plan office. None of the partners have desks allocated to them, so one day you'll be sitting next to the tax trainee doing their ATT exams. The next day you'll be sitting next to the corporate finance partner. The day after, sitting next to an admin person, and just getting a wide range of experiences like that.
Thanks, Brian. That's great. What I think we'll do now is, I'm conscious that we're getting towards the end. If I could maybe ask each of you in turn just a piece of advice that you would give to our attendees today that are perhaps considering a career into chartered accountancy training. What one piece of advice would you give them? So we'll maybe start with Sneha.
Yeah, I would say research the profession thoroughly, assess your skills and interests, because training for CA whilst balancing the work life can be slightly daunting, but it's also good to seek practical experience, whether that is through university societies or internships or even free workshops. I used to do workshops for Bright Network. And then you can also speak to people in the industry and learn from their guidance. And from someone who's taken a placement year, if you choose to do an internship, my biggest advice would also be to explore the role and the work, because you're not only working for them, but you're also choosing them. So, work from admin tasks to testing different accounts and even saying yes to opportunities that involve leadership. It's the best way to grow and to get out of your comfort zone and to help you start your career as a chartered accountant.
Thanks, Sneha. That's really great advice. Let's maybe ask Amy now. Could you share some advice that you would give?
Yeah, I would say one of the most important things to realise is that a lot of the trainees will come along and they will feel like they're clueless and don't know anything, and a lot of the times that is probably true, but that's okay. Like, we expect that, you know, you're not expected to come in and be a complete expert and know everything. We know, everybody knows you're a trainee, that you're there to learn, and there's support in place to help you, and that's, you know, that's built up through the ICAS qualification as well, you know, the stages that you go through to build up those skills and experience. And I think it'd be important to just engage with other people within your organisation, because sometimes, as I say, as a trainee, as an apprentice, you sometimes don't feel that your opinions is valid, or maybe you should just not, you know, you should just sit and watch, but absolutely not. Like, it absolutely is, and it's important that you engage and get involved in discussions.
Thanks, Amy. Again, great advice. And then Brian, come to you.
I think the location of where you pick to do your training contract is absolutely key. This is something that has to be right for you. You have to pick a firm that the values fit in with what you want. You're going to get the right support. You're going to work with people that are going to make you feel that you are important, as everyone else has said. And don't be afraid to ask questions during the interview process that will give you that reassurance. Looking at company websites, looking at testimonials, looking at things like LinkedIn, just to see what sorts of things people are posting around there, will give you a really, really good insight to what the culture at a firm is, and ultimately pick the firm that's the best culture for you. Yes, it's easy to look at a salary or something like that, but you need to pick somewhere that's the right culture for you for these 3 years. As Joanne said, it's a tough ask for 3 years. So finding somewhere that's the right fit for you is absolutely key.
Thanks, Brian. I think the only thing I would add to the great advice from the panel is, you know, accountancy is actually quite a small world. You'll be amazed at how many times in your career that you meet people that you met when you were a trainee or in different roles or at different networking events. I think what I would always say is always treat people the way you would like to be treated, because you just never know when you might come across those people again in your career, and when you might find that you're working with them, when you might need to go to them and ask them for some advice, for some help or a reference or whatever. So, you know, I just think, you know, always treat people the way that you would like them to treat you, and then you won't have any problems in later life. Okay, now I'm conscious that we have had a huge number of questions, so we're going to move into the Q&A just now, and we'll try and answer some of those just now. The ones that we don't get to, what we'll do is when we upload the recording, we'll pop up a list of the questions with answers to them as well, just so that we don't miss any of them out. So as we move into the Q&A, I'm just going to pop up the final poll. If I could ask you just to complete that, it's just on feedback on today's webinar. And while you're filling that in, I'll start going through the questions. And again, what I'll do is just direct these to the panel, and hopefully we can get a good range of advice for everyone. So the first question that we've got here says, would you recommend going straight into a 3-year contract after university, or would taking a year out be advisable, or would that put you at a disadvantage? Maybe either Brian or Amy, from an employer perspective, do you have a view on that one?
Do you want me to answer it, Amy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it makes absolutely no difference. At the end of the day, you apply for the training contract at the time you're wanting to commit to do it. We have people that, in theory, hopefully will be trainees with us in 2 years' time because of the way they've come in and done internships. We've had somebody start with us mid-year this year who didn't know if they wanted to do it after university, went and got relevant-ish experience in something slightly similar and applied on the back of that. The same side, we've got one of our qualified students is just about to disembark on a 3-month career break following qualification just over a year ago, because he didn't do the gap year. Not that any of us are jealous about this, but that if you find a firm that will support that, just because you don't do it at the time, it doesn't mean it's off the table. So there's no right or wrong answer. And if you go out for a year, have a great experience for a year, show what you've taken from it and improved from it, that's ultimately going to help you as well.
Thanks, Brian. I think that's great advice. So let's move on to some of the other questions. A couple of people are asking about coming from a non-accounting degree, and they're looking for some advice on getting experience in terms of internships or work experience. Amy or Brian, again, do either of your organisations offer internships? And if so, how do students go about applying for those?
Yes, so we do have a summer internship that come. Basically, you would just go onto our website and apply through that avenue. But just in terms of actually applying for a graduate scheme or a trainee scheme with us, it doesn't matter what your background is in terms of degree discipline. So if you don't have experience, that's absolutely fine, as long as you've demonstrated that commitment to learn and passion for the role. It won't matter if you don't have that specific experience, because they'll train you on the job.
Thanks, Amy. I think we've got a similar question here. Somebody's come in, they've already got a contract to start in September, so that's great, congratulations. But they've not come from an accounting or finance background, and asking about, do they need to do any preparation over the summer? Should they be studying in advance, etc.? So certainly I can answer that from an ICAS perspective. We don't expect you to come with any assumed knowledge. You know, all of our knowledge level subjects take you from zero understanding and zero knowledge. Now, it does go very quickly through that material and build up fairly quickly to getting you exam ready. So, you know, if you wanted to do some, you know, additional reading on maybe things like financial accounting, bookkeeping, but there's absolutely no requirement, and you will definitely not be the only person in your class who's coming in with no accounting knowledge. You know, we have a huge number of students that come in with a non-accounting degree to work through the qualification, and definitely doesn't put you at a disadvantage. The materials are designed to take you from no knowledge up to being exam ready. So I don't know if Amy or Brian have anything to add to that.
Would just echo that, if you know, you're free to look at whatever you like if you want to study away before you join, but there's absolutely no expectation that you would have done any pre-learning or study before you join Audit Scotland. So you could just have a nice holiday before you start if you'd prefer.
We're the same. We tend to have as part of our induction almost an intro to bookkeeping, accountancy type section within it. So and it makes no difference ultimately at the end of the day. I think if I can just very quickly jump back to the previous question, I think the big thing from our end, if you are coming from a non-relevant degree, would be coming into the interview stages trying to explain why you want to switch over to the accountancy degree. And just sort of really focusing on that would probably be a key part of the interview process as well.
So another question here, somebody who's asking about working in a non-accounting based firm, but they are still an ICAS ATO. Does that still count towards their 450 days of experience? Absolutely, yes. So if you are employed by one of our approved employers, so if they're an ICAS ATO, then the work experience that you count will be those 450 days. When you complete your achievement log, your record of your practical experience, you will be able to note down the different type of experience that you had, because, you know, as we said earlier on, you know, it is very much a sort of business qualification. It's not just about training auditors. You know, that's why we've expanded the qualification to have all the electives as well. So whilst a lot of our students do work in audit, it is not a requirement, and if you're employed by an ATO, then the work experience that you're doing will absolutely count towards your 450 days of relevant experience. Somebody's asking for a list of ICAS ATOs. It should be on the website. I think that's maybe, has that been replied? Yep, sorry, somebody's replied to that already. They're quicker than me. Some of them have been replied to. Somebody else who's looking to graduate in 2025. What could I do now to help me secure a graduate trainee chartered accountancy position and work experience? Again, does that come back to the internships maybe? I think it depends on your degree. I think some degrees, I know Sneha, you mentioned you did a placement year, but that was through your university offered that with a placement. Others would be looking at internships either directly on employer websites. Okay, there are still some questions that I know we've not got to, but I'm conscious that we are out of time. So what I'm going to do is just bring everything to a close. And as I say, when we share the recording, we will also share any questions that we haven't yet managed to answer, and share the answers to those questions, just to give you all that information you need, and help you with starting your career in accounting and finance. So that just leaves me to bring this to a close, to thank everyone for attending, and to thank the speakers that we've got. We've got Amy, Sneha and Brian, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. I really hope it's been helpful, and until next time, goodbye.